You are listening to This is Oklahoma, hosted by Mike Hearn, telling stories of Oklahomans and those that have made it their home.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma podcast. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode. Excited to share this episode with you today. But before we do, I've got to thank our sponsors. First of all, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. They've been a huge part of this podcast for the last few years. So the Oklahoma Hall of Fame have been sharing Oklahoma's story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com. And for daily updates, go to oklahomahof on Instagram and give them a follow. Our other sponsor today is the Chickasaw Nation. Now, the Chickasaw Nation have sponsored pretty much everything in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma, and it's an honor to have their name and their brand supporting this podcast. So a huge shout out to Governor Anatoby for supporting this podcast. It really means a lot. Our third sponsor is Diffie Ford Lincoln down in El Reno. Now, this one makes me so happy because these guys are great friends of mine, play a lot of golf together. I've bought my cars from them, do most of my oil changes down there, have a cup of coffee, hang out down in El Reno. It's a good spot to go. And not only are they great friends, but they provide a great service. So for over 60 years, third generation family owned Oklahoma business down in El Reno. They're also in Bethany as well. So people in the Bethany area know the Diffies really well. But if you're looking for anything new, used, Ford, Lincoln, or whatever, I'm sure they could find anything you want. Check them out, diffieford.net, and then on Instagram at diffiefordlincoln. And let's get into today's episode. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of This is Oklahoma. Mike Hearn here, your host, back with another episode. Today we're at the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, and I have the pleasure of interviewing Major General Mancino. Tommy, you go by, I guess.
Tommy, please.
Which, thank you for coming down. Excited to dive into your story, hear a little bit about the Oklahoma National Guard and your involvement in it. Obviously, chatting before, your family's pretty involved with it as well. So we'll get into all that. But I guess starting off, what is the general state of the union with the Oklahoma National Guard at the moment? So
the Oklahoma National Guard, I think, is in a really good spot. My predecessors and men and women, 8,600 men and women, soldiers and airmen of the Oklahoma Army National Guard and Air National Guard, I think are really doing a great job for the country. They've, over the last 20 plus years now, well, more than that, since 9/11 and the War on Terror, they've been called upon multiple times to deploy, leave their families, to deploy overseas in support of the nation. And they've also had an opportunity, often in dire circumstances, to support Oklahoma. Of course, we did COVID-19. Prior to 9/11, we were involved in the Murrah bombing, Katrina. These are all things that has occurred in what I would call kind of the post-Vietnam era of the National Guard. And the National Guard has several different eras, and we can talk about that if it's of interest to your listeners. Yeah. But the history of the National Guard, I think, is fascinating, and Oklahoma, the Oklahoma National Guard in particular, has a strong history. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can definitely dive into all the history of the Oklahoma National Guard because the general person listening to this probably doesn't have any idea, right? They just see, you guys around, or they see the facility and everything you're doing, and or maybe you're on the news, but definitely we can dive into the history. Before we do, though, tell me a little bit about your history and your Oklahoma story.
So I grew up in Oklahoma. I'm a native born and raised here in Oklahoma. I grew up in Broken Arrow. My family moved to Broken Arrow when I think there were under 8,000 or so residents, and now there's 150. I'm just throwing that number out, but Broken Arrow is huge. I think all of Oklahoma has really, over the course of my life now, some 53 years, is really just kind of it's gone gangbusters. And I have had an opportunity to live outside the state. I spent some time in Florida, spent some time in Silicon Valley, but there's nowhere I would rather live and raise my children than here in Oklahoma. So I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, you're right. Broken Arrow. I one of my best friends in college was from Broken Arrow, and he now moved back, and I've been up to visit him a few times, and yeah, it's a bit of a scene up there now, and I think it's great things going on.
Yeah, there's just a lot of activity in a lot of places here in Oklahoma. Oklahoma City, the area we're downtown here, 30 or 40 years ago, wasn't the same. Bricktown has gone crazy. The Oklahoma downtown scene has really gone gangbusters, if you will. And I think Tulsa was a little behind in that movement, the downtown area, but it's coming along. And Broken Arrow itself, as a kind of a rural community, is just going, or not a rural community, but a a community neighboring Tulsa has just expanded tremendously, and it's really good things.
Yeah, definitely.
I now live in Norman. I better mention that for my Norman fellow Normanites, and I'm very excited to live in Norman as well.
Yeah, there is a big golf tournament coming to Norman this year and for the next 5 years, which I have the pleasure of being a part of on the logistics side, not on the golfing side, sadly.
Is that going to be at the OU
It will be at
course?
Jimmy Austin.
Okay, sure,
Yeah.
wonderful.
June 22nd to the 25th, I think. Corn Ferry Tour will be in town, which as a golfer, that makes me really happy. So golf in the States, great. Growing up then, what is kind of your kind of not earliest memory, but just kind of what do you remember about, kind of growing up around, family in the house? Was it quite a military presence in the house?
So, yeah, my father was a school teacher when I was young, and he went on to be an entrepreneur, owned a boat business in Broken Arrow, Triple K, for those of you that remember. There's not that many marinas in Broken Arrow. And so he had an opportunity to do that. And really, I had kind of the idyllic life, middle class. I had, two parents, stable home, nuclear family. It was very fortunate in all of that. But my father, I tell the joke that my father said he was going to help his recruiting numbers so that I was either going to get in the National Guard when I turned 17 and a half, or I could get out of the house. Now, that's a joke. But I wanted to do it. There was a strong incentive for me to follow in my father's footsteps. I saw what he was doing in the National Guard and how much he really loved it, and I thought I'd give it a try. Yeah. So when I was 17 and a half, junior in high school, I joined the National Guard and been doing that for the last 36 years, almost 37 years now. So kind of rolls off my tongue. It seems it doesn't seem that long ago. So things go by quick.
Time does go. I'm realizing that time goes by very fast, which reminds me to enjoy every single day as much as possible.
Spend it in something meaningful.
Yes, which for me, I was trying to convince my wife to let me buy the car that I want and that I can't afford. Because my favorite quote is, life is too short to drive boring cars. Yeah, that's it. Anyway, so you see Dad, he's a teacher. He starts his own business in the boat business. So is he just a part of the National Guard the whole time then in your childhood?
And I want to go ahead and tell this story because I think it's important to the history. There was a period of time in the late 1960s, I was born in 1969, where Vietnam was raging. And there were a lot of people, including my father. Sorry, Dad, if you don't like this. I think you made up for it over your 40-year career or so. But he got in the National Guard to essentially avoid the draft, and that was common. That's a whole nother story, a whole nother thing we can talk about. But that era of history is something that many of us that didn't live through it don't really fully comprehend, because in our lifetime, we've always looked at the military in a very strong, and favorable light. And, of course, in the late 1960s, the general consensus was a little different. And that is unfortunate. In fact, I take every opportunity I can to thank our Vietnam era veterans for the way they were treated. But nevertheless, that was an element of the National Guard of that time. And I said we would talk about the history. Fascinatingly enough, the National Guard, especially from Oklahoma, went to World War II, went to the Korean War, was not utilized in the Vietnam War. In fact, no National Guard unit was. There's a few that say they were. They really weren't. That became something known as the Abrams Doctrine, named after the famous General Abrams, who said we will never again go to war without the National Guard, because when the National Guard goes to war, our communities go to war. And so ever since then, the National Guard has been an integral part of our overseas military operations, and probably will be for the future. Yeah. So to answer your question directly, he gets in to the National Guard primarily because I was young and he wasn't ready to go to Vietnam. My mother wasn't into him going to Vietnam, but he found he loved it. And it really became his lifelong passion. He was in the National Guard for, I think, 40 years, right around 40 years, retired in around 2005 or 6, I want to say. He's going to be mad because I don't have his history exactly memorized. But anyway, he had a wonderful, great career, retired as a general. And as we were talking before, actually had an opportunity to be the first National Guard general officer to take a unit into combat since Korea, which was wonderful. And I went with him. I was a young major, so I saw him command that unit in combat, the 45th Infantry Brigade, and subsequently had opportunity to command in combat myself. So.
Yeah. let's go to that. What's that like? Gearing up, training, we're going. Right, you get that assignment, you get that date that you're going, overseas to combat. What's that like?
So today, that is an experience that a lot more of our National Guard men and women have, because we are, like we were discussing earlier, and for the benefit of your audience, we've been utilized so much. Oklahoma per capita at one point was the most deployed state in the nation. Now, I say that, I wouldn't want some other state. We have some other states like our buddies Arkansas, Minnesota that also deploy a lot. So I would want that to be fact-checked, but we are right up there at the top. And I think the really important takeaway is that our men and women mobilize a lot. And so when we mobilize, what's that mean? Well, to the National Guardsman or woman, that means you're getting ready. You're spending a month or more before you even get overseas, often 2 months, and weekends up to a year ahead, training to go. And then, of course, you have the stress of your full-time job to deal with, because you're leaving that employment, you're leaving your family to go overseas. I'll tell you, it's also exciting, the first time especially that you do it. We were going into Afghanistan right after the fall of the Taliban in around 2003. So the state of the country was still very much in flux, and we were one of the first units to train the Afghan National Army. And I subsequently went to Iraq in 2007 and 2008, and I went back to Afghanistan in very intense combat in 2011 and 2012. And
what's that like with your dad? Like you going like that?
I tell people that, it's odd because I'm like,
very odd, right?
I've seen he puts his pants on one leg at a time like everybody else, but he was a bigger than life character, very well, I think, beloved by the men and women in the Oklahoma Guard, and to watch him lead in combat was just an outstanding experience. I mean, I wouldn't be here without him. That's the obvious statement scientifically, but also I wouldn't be a general officer today if it wasn't for his mentoring and watching him in action and just kind of being around him and many other generals, General Deering, General Grizzle. There's just a number of generals that have been impactful. And I left some of you out. I cannot not say General Thompson, Mike Thompson, my mentor and friend, who was the Adjutant General prior to me. Those kind of guys were just instrumental. Nobody gets here on their own. Yeah. You're mentored and trained by those that come before you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So backing up slightly then, you decide at 17 and a half, 18, that's what you're going to do. Do most people come, kids, quote, in quotes, come out of, high school, they're going to National Guard. Are they thinking they're going to go to university as well? Like, because it's quite a big decision to make at 18 years old, right?
Today, I think more do than did.
Okay.
And back when I joined the National Guard, there wasn't a major educational incentive to doing so.
Okay.
That's changed, and I'll take a quick opportunity to express to everybody that's listening, thanks to Governor Stitt and the legislature. Last year, they passed an amazing bill that provides for complete in-state tuition and fee waivers. And you can also be from out of state, and you are eligible for the waiver too, but you are able to waive your tuition and fees. Prior to last year, we had a deal, I call it a deal, we had basically a handshake agreement, and we were very glad for it with higher ed, that they would waive fees. They would waive tuition, excuse me, I got that wrong. But what has happened in the state, and it's across the nation in higher education, our fees are becoming more and more of a portion of the total tuition package. And in Oklahoma, at our major institutions, that was true. They're roughly at OU equal. I have a daughter going, so I know. She's not in the Guard, so I'm very aware. But they're roughly equal. And that had kind of eaten into the educational benefit for our soldiers and airmen. And with the help of the legislature, we were able to pass that legislation. And we are right now having one of our best recruiting years in the Oklahoma National Guard that we've had since about 2010. But that's not true nationwide. And we could talk about that a little if you thought it would be interesting. But nationwide, only about 20% of young men and women today are even eligible to enter the military. So right off the back, 80 out of every 100 young men and women, unfortunately, because I think it's such a great opportunity, are excluded. And that can be everything from weight to tattoos to
Wow.
an inability to pass the ASVAB.
Yeah. So it's not just purely physical. It's like you said. There's
No,
they
it's
have,
roughly, if I was to
tattoos and
guess,
things, yeah.
also there are challenges in getting in the military if you've ever taken a prescription mental health medication or ADHD drug. Sure. I don't want anybody to hear this thinking, well, I'm not eligible. That's not true. Sure. I want you to go talk to the recruiters and see what it is. But there is an element of that too. And with modern technology, you're able to see every prescription that a young man or woman has taken. And so a lot of them are at least slowed down in the process for that. It's not a bar. Don't take it as a bar, but it is an issue. Gotcha. And all of those combined to make it a very difficult recruiting environment in which in the last year you've had, like, for instance, the Marine Corps not make its recruiting goal for the first time in however many umpteen decades. Yeah. It's a very serious recruiting problem nationwide. We still have a recruiting problem in Oklahoma, but we are with the help of the legislature and the governor, like I said, working to find solutions for that and doing better. But it's still tough. It's a tough environment. Yeah.
So you go, you make that decision. You go in, kind of wet behind the ears, right?
Oh,
the whole
absolutely.
I'm going to do this. This is going to be great. And
sure.
What's that like? Straight to training, I guess.
Yeah. So basically, we call that we call a split option. And what that means is you're splitting going to basic training one summer between your junior and senior year. So I was actually a soldier when I came back for my senior year, which was much more impressive to me than it was to all the young ladies that I was hoping it was impressive to. Sorry, young ladies, if you had to put up with that when I was young. But then you go to advanced training, we call it, after your senior year and between your first year of college. So I did that, and I was an enlisted soldier in the Oklahoma National Guard for about 4 years, and I went to OSU. And I was a part of the OSU ROTC program where I got a commission in 1992. I'm going to have to think about it. You're going to see me go like this for some of these dates, but it was a long time ago. Yeah. So basically I was in that ROTC program and graduated from OSU ROTC as a second lieutenant military intelligence officer in 1992.
Yeah. And this is me not knowing anything, and maybe my listeners feel the same way. When they see, when I saw friends in school that were doing ROTC, is it kind of like, yes, you're going to school, but you're also doing, military stuff on the side, like an athlete would be going to school and doing athlete stuff on the side?
It very much is. Okay. In fact, in Oklahoma, we offer a program called College First for members of the National Guard that are in college that want to complete college, and when they sign up for their enlistment contract, we promise not to mobilize them except in extremis. If there's a major war, all bets are off. But for the mobilizations we've done for the last 20 years, they're hands off. We allow them to complete their college work if they choose to. Many choose to deploy because they want that experience, but if they choose to, they don't have to do that.
Yeah. So what was your initial contract that you signed then?
Well, as an officer, it works a little differently. Okay. So you basically just raise your hand and you're an officer, and you can stay as long as the Army will have you. Okay. And or upon you can retire as an officer at any point. That's an officer. A typical enlistment contract is 6 to 8 years. It can be shorter, and there's different. We call them tri-buys, where you may do a 4x2, where you may stay in the inactive reserve for a period of time. But basically, you're a young man or woman is basically looking at a 6-year commitment.
Yeah. So back to you going to Afghanistan with Dad in 2003. You're in there about just over 10 years then.
Yeah, I was freshly promoted to a major by the time that we had gone. We went to Afghanistan for the first time. Okay. I had some, it may be instructive to kind of quickly talk about the differences between the active duty and the National Guard. Yeah. So there are two different, and you don't have to remember this, listeners, because it's most active duty folks don't either, but there's two methods of the military in the United States: Title 10 U.S. Code and Title 32 U.S. Code. Title 10 U.S. Code is what most people think about when they think about the military. It is the active duty Marines, Navy, Air Force, etc. Full-time active duty. Title 32 is the title of authority that governs the National Guard. And its history is much different. It is the direct descendant descendants, if you will, of the militia. So in the United States, in the 18th century, we fought a war with England, and this is basic common knowledge, but it was the militiamen, right, that did it, the Minuteman. And that's, if you look at a lot of our imagery, it's of the Minuteman, the person, the farmer who goes and grabs his gun and belongs to the militia. And in this country, there is a huge tradition of not having a standing army. I remind my active duty colleagues of this sometimes, much to their chagrin, but the constitutional founders really didn't want an army. They didn't want a full-time military. They wanted it to be a militia-based military. And so we as the National Guard are kind of the flag bearers and the descendants of the militia. And it basically means that we are, I don't like to say part-time soldiers because that diminishes the impact of my airmen and soldiers when they go into combat. Because when we go into combat, we're shoulder to shoulder with the active duty and we're all fighting side by side. But it is true that they don't do it full-time. They maintain a job outside of the military for the most part. We have some full-time folks, but they're very minimal. And that's the structure. And we're there to be called upon by the state or the nation. The other key factor, and this has come up recently in the coronavirus debate, when Governor Stitt informed the Secretary of Defense that he would not be complying with the Secretary's requirement that everyone be vaccinated. You might have heard about that. Well, I, as a general officer in the Oklahoma National Guard, work for Governor Stitt. He is my commander-in-chief. Obviously, President Biden remains my president. And should President Biden choose to activate me, then I will instantly switch and I will be on Title 10. And my chain of command will run up to President Biden. Sometimes that confuses people. I take an oath to both the Constitution of the United States and to the Constitution of Oklahoma, the president and the governor. And it's a little tricky, especially when those come into conflict, as we saw. But we worked our way through it, and I think that we came out on the other side. Yeah. But that is definitely a different aspect of the National Guard.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I definitely had no idea. I'm sure some other people wouldn't either. So there's definitely value there. You mentioned, a lot of people have a career, full-time jobs outside of that. Did you have, or do you have, during that your time in?
I did. I was, as I mentioned, I lived in Tampa, Florida, and I was a technology entrepreneur. We worked for a company that did artificial intelligence, a startup called Kinetoscope. And I went from that to a job as a venture capitalist, a junior venture capitalist. But I got to participate in the dot-com boom right at the 1998 through 2000 timeframe in Silicon Valley. And that was a very interesting time. Came back to Oklahoma to have my oldest daughter. I have 3 children, and my oldest daughter, Charlotte, was going to be born, and just didn't want to, my wife and I just didn't want to have our first child in Silicon Valley. And we came back, moved back to Broken Arrow, and I took a job at first with the University of Phoenix, and then eventually I became an associate dean at the Tulsa Community College. So I did about 10 years of that, although I'll tell you, during those 10 years would have been the 9/11 time. I probably only spent 5 years on the job, and I spent 5 years mobilized and deployed. Yeah, in that same time frame.
Well, probably when people meet you, they don't think that you spent time in Silicon Valley doing tech stuff, do they?
No, that's generally a surprise.
It's the
I have to prove that yes, I actually can code, et cetera, et cetera. But and I only say that I only say that because I think it's important that young people know that the National Guard is a supplement to what they want to do. It doesn't stop you from doing anything that you want to. And a lot of times that's why people choose the Guard. They have an interest in the military, but maybe they're not sure that that's what they want to do for a career. They have an interest in something else. And we have lawyers and doctors and computer programmers, et cetera, that people do for careers. And if you're starting a career, it's also a wonderful place to get skills.
So growing up then, you had a passion for technology and got to see all that come through and see it from computers making a noise, right?
I did, literally.
I was born in 1990, so I do remember that just.
A TRS-80 was my first computer, and it used a cassette. So those of you that are young don't know what a cassette is. It was, but a cassette think Guardians of the Galaxy, and it would literally, you'd push it and you'd hear the, and so I've always been interested in computers and had a passion for technology. I went to school. I left OSU. I left this out, but I better get my credentials in there. I went to OU, where I got both an MBA and a law degree.
Okay.
So my first job really was as a management consultant prior to the entrepreneurial opportunity. It was also in Florida, but I only did that for about a year.
Yeah. So what do you think of ChatGPT 4?
I love ChatGPT. So ChatGPT 3 I'm familiar with.
Yeah.
4, no, you're correct.
4 is the new one, right?
4 is the new one, and I haven't played with it yet.
Okay.
But AI, as I said, one of my first entrepreneurial activities was an AI company, an intelligence agent company. So I'm very familiar with artificial intelligence, and it is a fascinating topic that we could probably have a whole other podcast on. But it's fascinating, and anyone that hasn't played with ChatGPT yet should.
Yeah. It's as a friend of mine and a previous guest of the podcast who is kind of going viral at the moment because he basically gave ChatGPT $100 and said, make me as much money as possible.
I saw that.
Yeah, Jackson. He's
but
from
I
Oklahoma
didn't know
City.
he was from Oklahoma. That's wonderful.
I
saw a little, I didn't actually watch it. I saw a little YouTube clip, I think.
Yeah.
That,
so
as you say, is going viral. Well, cool.
Yeah. So he's from here, and he's kind of a tech guy from the design side, and what do you call it, like a design agency side.
Sure. Well, Oklahoma has some very good firms here. I won't give any shout outs to any particular ones because then I'll leave the others off the table. But we have some really good software development companies here in the downtown area where people just prefer to live in Oklahoma, and I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's great. And they're doing amazing things.
And they absolutely are.
They get to live a cheaper lifestyle in Oklahoma, right?
And
awesome.
I fully support our AI overlords. So
yeah, the ones that keep sending you stuff on listening to your phone and sending you ads, right?
That is a joke for anyone that tries to play this on YouTube.
Yeah, you're gonna.
My PAOs are wanting to know. Yes, it's a joke.
It's a joke. Oh, brilliant. So yeah, you mentioned you get 9/11. I guess happens when you're in your full-time job, right?
Yeah, actually, I was at the University of Phoenix, like I said, for a short period of time. I fully remember sitting in the office, and my daughter was about to be born. And I watched the first aircraft fly in to the World Trade Center. There's a story about an Oklahoma Guardsman I should tell about that. Rick Rescorla, and I'll get back to that.
Okay, I'll remind you.
He's actually Welsh, I think, believe it or not. There's a tie-in here. You're going to like it, but we'll do it right after this.
Yeah.
So I watched 9/11, and of course that's horrendous. As a military intelligence officer, the first one I was suspicious of. By the time I saw the second one, I instantly kind of knew in my heart what had happened and was just, mortified along with the whole country. And then, of course, from there we watched the invasion of Afghanistan and the invasion of Iraq, both of which the Oklahoma National Guard participated in. I didn't, but we had units, especially in the invasion of Iraq, that were participating. And after that, it has been a quite regular stream of deployments. In fact, people may not know it, even though we have greatly reduced our operations in Iraq and we have left Afghanistan, the Oklahoma National Guard is as deployed as it has been since 2010 or 2011 this summer. Right now, I have 1,200 soldiers from the 45th Infantry Brigade that are preparing to deploy to Africa. I have soldiers from the 45th Field Artillery Brigade that are in the Middle East. And I do not want to leave my Air Guard brother and sisters out. I have Air Guard units. There tend to be smaller packages that go repeatedly, but they are constantly deployed. And so we find ourselves, even today, continuing to support the nation.
Mm-hmm. When 9/11 happens, does Dad call you? Because Dad's still kind of running the show in Oklahoma.
Well, at that point he was in the infantry brigade, and we don't know what's going to happen because the National Guard combat units, like an infantry brigade, had not been used in the prior invasion. There was a little bit of history there where units were mobilized but not sent overseas. So that caused a little consternation within the Guard community. But at one point, to get to kind of where I think you're going, I get a call from my dad saying, hey, get ready because we're going to Afghanistan. And so that was obviously a moment of shock and awe for my mother and my wife, who was now at that point pregnant with my middle son. This will be a theme that recurs. And so basically the second time that we go, when my father and I, actually I got that off. I'm sorry, honey. That was the second deployment. The first deployment was my oldest daughter, as I said, and it was shock and awe for her. We do the train up and we go overseas into Afghanistan. And he's the first, like I said, as he will tell you, general officer to lead a National Guard unit in combat since Korea. So it's the reversal of that Abrams doctrine that we discussed. The Army at this point was very much wanting to have the National Guard participate because when we go, America goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tell me the story about Rick and 9/11.
Yeah, so there's a gentleman that is just a real hero of mine. His name is Rick Rescorla. He was, I don't want to get his nationality wrong, he was English writ large, right? But he had fought in Rhodesia. He'd fought in Rhodesia and so had some experience, but he came to the United States and he joins the active duty Army in order to become a citizen. You might have seen the name Rick Rescorla in the book or movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young. Okay. In fact, that's the book version, he's on the cover of the book, and he's quite famous for his role in the Battle of LZ X-Ray, where that's the movie as well, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, where he's known for singing bawdy British drinking songs and other songs to keep the morale of his units up. Outstanding combat leader, just an amazing individual, ties to Oklahoma. He comes back to Oklahoma and goes to the University of Oklahoma Law School and is a member of the Oklahoma National Guard at that point. He was my father's OCS officer. Okay. So he helps run the OCS program. And that's the tie-in. The really fascinating thing about Rick is after graduating from OU, he leaves the National Guard and the Army, and he goes and he works for, I want to say Morgan Stanley. It's one of the big named firms in New York. And prior to 9/11, there was also a bombing in, I think, 1986 or so. But he would always train his people to get out of the building, and he would make these very wealthy, powerful stockbrokers do these battle drills, we call them, to exit the building. So after the first bombing, he's brought in and he evaluates, him and a partner evaluate, and he says, look, if this building gets attacked, it's going to be attacked by a van underground. And that's exactly what happened. And that's an amazing prediction. He makes another more amazing prediction, and this is all documented. He says the next scenario that he was worried about is a plane flying into the World Trade Center. But he suspects that that's significant weakness. Sure enough, 9/11 happens. He gets all of his folks out, everybody safely out. And the hero he is, he returns up the stairs in the World Trade Center to try to save more people and is killed when the second aircraft hits the building. So he's just a real hero of mine. He has a connection to the Oklahoma National Guard. We have an award every year that we give for leadership, the Rick Rescorla Award. And I just think that's indicative of, the kind of person he was and then the kind of person and people that we try to emulate here in the National Guard. Of course, there's many, many World War II and Korean veteran heroes that I could go through, ad nauseum. The 45th Infantry Division. There's a Netflix series. Do you know the name of the series? The Liberators. It's you might have seen it. The 45th has a wonderful history, a wonderful lineage. We are building a new museum for the division and the Oklahoma National Guard, and so that's going to be an excellent thing we're going to get to do as well.
Yeah. What's it like coming back from, everyone talks to me, after I ask you, what's it like going to war and going to battle and you're going to the desert? What's it like coming back?
So it's everything kind of different the second time, or the third or fourth time. It's great coming back. It depends. So I need to frame this correctly. The first time we went to Afghanistan, the country was still in a state of chaos, but the Taliban had not regrouped to an effective fighting force. So we lost at that deployment, 2003 and 4, nobody in combat. And so it's obviously a different experience when you come back and you're not burdened by losses. In fact, I think Churchill, I'm going to paraphrase, but Churchill said, there's nothing more exhilarating than to get fired on without effect. That's true. Getting shot at's great. Having somebody wounded, or hit, or you getting hit isn't. So there's that element of excitement that you come off of combat deployment with, and it's completely different, of course, when you suffer losses. But coming home is just wonderful. You get to see your family. There's that emotional connection, that sense of accomplishment. It's a great feeling.
Yeah.
Tempered by when you have losses. And of course, there were losses in between the time we went, because the National Guard went several more times. I didn't go on every one. The 180th Infantry Battalion deployed and lost a soldier in that interim period between our deployment and our first deployment and then our Iraq. And I'm saying it's mostly, I come at the context of this as the 45th Infantry Brigade, which was the unit. It's the largest unit in the state, and it's the unit that I spent the most time in. There were many other deployments of other National Guard and Air Guard units too. And we also lost some pilots, helicopter pilots and other folks. But the deployments I was on, the first two, we lost no one. So we went to Afghanistan and trained the Afghan National Army. And then in 2007 and 2008, we went to the Green Zone in Baghdad, where we served under General Petraeus in the embassy. And other units did other things that were there. They did prison duty and other things, but we lost no one. No one was killed in combat. The big third deployment for the Infantry Brigade was into Afghanistan into 2010 and 11, and that was the Obama surge. And the enemy by that point had become very well organized, and that was a serious fight in which, unfortunately, we had several casualties. And so the returning home is just tempered by that.
That was the toughest one. That was the toughest deployment that you'd been.
That was the toughest deployment by far. Yeah, that was the most we were in daily combat. So I commanded a Task Force Cheyenne. You might notice we have a big connection in Oklahoma with our Indian heritage and Indian community, and so we take tribe names as our call signs, and as you know, out of respect, we have Creek. We have Creek, Cherokee, major tribes that are unit designators, and I was Task Force Cheyenne. And so Task Force Cheyenne was a combat task force of infantry and engineers in Logman Province, Afghanistan, and the brigade was in several places in Afghanistan, but those were hard fights. We were in sustained combat the entire time we were there. Yeah. Almost daily engagements.
Like just popping off shots at you, small mortar stuff off the back of trucks.
I think, right. It's not so, you see...
Nothing really structured.
You see the D-Day invasion. It wasn't anything... Yeah. It could be that intense, but for small bursts. The enemy's just not... The Taliban, as an insurgency, was never capable of massing enough combat power to challenge you really on the battlefield. But they used IEDs, improvised explosive devices, which were just jugs of buried explosives that were made out of fertilizer, and very, very crude, but very effective. Mm-hmm. And by that time, they had really mastered the techniques of their use, and they were quite deadly. Mm-hmm. And they were also would engage you with small arms. And they knew the terrain. They're an insurgency. Yeah. And you were limited by your ability appropriately to react because you didn't want to cause unnecessary civilian casualties. Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot of constraints on operations. But overall, I was extremely proud of the Oklahoma National Guard. And there is a movie, Citizen Soldier, that was made, and you can get it on Netflix, and it covers that period of the brigade's history. Yeah.
I mean, it's, I'm just chatting to you now for 30 plus minutes. Like it's, the positions that you're put in, right? Like the life lessons and then the way that you've gone through everything and fortunate and unfortunate on however way you want to look at it, right? Like, seeing friends and other soldiers, die in battle is not something you want anyone else to go through.
No, in fact, I think it's a common saying or euphemism, if you will, that the soldiers are the ones that know war. They want peace the most. Yeah. we stand, and that's very much true for me today. I'm a little old now and probably not quite in my prime, as my wife will tell you. But the issue is that young men oftentimes seem to want to prove themselves to go into combat. And that's understandable, and I think that's been the way it has been throughout the history. But by the time you've done that once, twice, or three times, you're more reluctant because you recognize it's both the sacrifices that your soldiers and airmen will make, and then it's the potential loss. Mm-hmm. And we can't forget those that we've lost.
Right.
And it's just a difference. It's the maturation of a warrior's mindset, I guess, if you will. The Stoic philosophers believe in fortune and the importance of fortune, and you just realize, hey, if I take a step the wrong way on this trail, I hit that bomb and I'm not here anymore. Mm-hmm. But for whatever reason, I chose to go down this right path, and I'm here today versus my colleague that went down the left, isn't. And it's a mindset. And of course, we have all kinds of problems that result from that with PTSD. Suicide remains a horrible problem, a continuing problem. In fact, I lost a good friend of mine 2 weeks ago to suicide, a senior officer in the National Guard. Just a horrible scourge, and we do everything we can to stop it. Again, I keep coming back to Oklahoma. One of the things about being in the National Guard in Oklahoma is we have great support from the populace, the legislature, and the governor, and they've given us an ARPA project. The state received a bunch of money from the federal government, stimulus money related to COVID, and they were kind enough to appropriate some of that for a mental health facility for the National Guard and first responders, and that's one of the things that we're working on that I'm really happy about. It's not going to solve the problem.
Right.
I don't think anything is going to solve it, but we're just going to do whatever we can to make it better.
Yeah, that listening to you talk about that, it does seem like if you're already in the military and like that's your career, and you're coming back from a deployment, you're still going to the base probably, or you're still around your guys, whereas the National Guard has to go back to being a teacher, being a doctor.
100%. You got it 100%.
Yeah, so then you've got to suppress that, and it gets worse, right?
It absolutely. It's absolutely, I believe, harder for a guardsman to transition back into the civilian world than it is for an active duty person, because one of the reasons is an active duty soldier or airman, sailor, whatever, has the opportunity to take advantage of a lot of those functions that the base, let's say, that they're on, makes available to them. And we do our best to do that. But yeah, we at basically 30 days or so after you get back, you're back in your civilian job. And we have contact with you once a month. Now, we do a lot. And I have a staff of almost probably now 20 mental health professionals within the state, family readiness type professionals who do their best to maintain that contact. But you're right. If that soldier or airman doesn't want to facilitate that, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, you think 30 days ago I was getting shot at in the desert, halfway around the world. Yeah,
literally. That's yeah. Well, I often share this because I think it's important for our younger soldiers. So PTSD is complex. There's a physical element of it that people oftentimes don't understand. And that results, in my opinion, I'm not a doctor, but I experienced it firsthand, and I've talked to a lot of doctors. Basically, your cortisol system burns out. You're on edge for a year.
Sure.
Where every time you hit a bump in the road, you're afraid that that's a bomb, and so you're hyperly vigilant. You're hyper aware, and it kind of just burns out your system. And that's a physical problem. When I got back from Afghanistan, that last tour, the one that was significant combat tour, I had a bunch of physical problems. I was 160 pounds. I had sleep apnea. I mean, that's not normal, And so I went to the VA, and they do a great job. And I encourage all my soldiers and airmen, go to the VA. And I received treatment, and obviously now I'm much better. But it was a significant physical deterrent. But one of the things that was funny is I was so hypervigilant that if I heard a noise, I always carried a pistol on my hip. But obviously, when I'm walking around Broken Arrow, I didn't have a pistol. Right. But if a car backfired or a door slammed or you walked up on me, I would do what I called the Barney Fife, and I would grab this at this fake pistol on my hip, and I would pull it out, and I would do this motion where I'm engaging the poor plumber that just walked around the corner in my house, yelling at him to get down. Yeah. That kind, and it's just like that. But the funny thing is as fast as it happened, you realize that it wasn't real. And so I would be like, I'd just blow it like Barney Fife. God, no big deal. And my kids thought it was hysterical. They tried to scare me to make me Barney Fife. But those types of things they over time, you get better.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I don't want people to do is one of the problem. It's not a problem. One of the challenges we have with so much outreach in Oklahoma and really around the nation, we have so many nonprofits that support soldiers and everything. I think you watch football or you watch whatever sports, you oftentimes see, and it would be logical for you to think that, every soldier has these mental problems. Every soldier is broken. That's not true, right? And I think we have to fight that. That's probably part of our recruiting problem is they're like, well, I'm not going to get in the military. Look, they're going to send me overseas. That might be interesting, but I'm going to come back and I'm going to be broken. Yeah. That's not true. That's not exactly how it works. There absolutely are elements of people that go over and they have problems, but there are many ways today to work through those.
Yeah. So getting back then from that tour and going through, like I said, some PTSD stuff, take me through, how you've progressed through the National Guard over the last 12 years to current day.
Great. So the key to getting promoted to 2-star general in the National Guard is out-survive everybody else by just being there. Actually, that's kind of a joke, kind of not. I think it's instructive for everyone to know, hey, one element of any promoting in any job is being there and doing the job. And I've been very fortunate. Making colonel in the National Guard is a major accomplishment, more or less general. And but I left in 2014. I had an opportunity. The Army sent me to Harvard Kennedy School for a year as a national security fellow. I always have to stress I wasn't smart enough to get into Harvard myself. The Army had to send me, so there you have it. But loved that experience. Came back from that, and I transitioned to be the working with my technical skills and everything back into the CIO role. Okay. So I'm going to get the timing wrong, but no one's really going to care. I spent 3 or 4 years as the Chief Information Officer for the Oklahoma National Guard. Mm-hmm. And from that, I had an opportunity under General Thompson to be promoted, and I was what we called the State Resource Manager or Executive Director of the National Guard, which meant that, so the Oklahoma National Guard, again, we have a federal component and a state component. I ran the state component for General Thompson. And then, on veterans, last year, a little bit over a year ago, I had an opportunity to become the Adjutant General when Governor Stitt appointed me, and the legislature was kind enough to confirm my appointment. And I just got promoted basically a year after that to 2-star, to Major General rank. And again, I never would have thought I would be here. Those that know me, I'm sure, never thought I would be here either. So the good news to everyone out there is you can do it too. If I can do it, you can do it. But it is quite an honor. And I think, as we walked up the stairs into the building, of the 6 or 7 portraits that are on the staircase, I think 3 of them were of general officers, including some that were from the 45th. So to be a part of that lineage,
that's cool.
Is very cool, and it's just humbling.
Yeah, you think, what else have I got to do to be on that wall, right? It's
right.
A long way to go.
I tell people a lot, that people will come up and they want to get a photo with you, and to me, I'm like, you want to get a photo with me? It's like, yeah, just in case I do something, and then you can say, I know that guy. See, look at that. But hopefully you don't do that. That's the object is not to be known in that way. Yeah. But yeah, it's just it's an amazing, humbling experience, and like we talked, it seems to me like just yesterday I was in basic training. In my mind, I can remember all the stuff I did wrong in basic training. A lot of guys may come up here and want to tell you all the things they did right. Well, that's boring. I'm not going to tell you, but I did a lot of things wrong. Trust me. In a 37-year career, there's a lot there. Yeah. And I've just had some great experiences, and I've met great people. And really, I think the key thing is surround yourself with good people, because if it wasn't for the enlisted soldiers that I had worked for me, or the other colleagues of officers or the senior officers, there's no way I would be here today.
Yeah. Well, and, over the last 12 years, obviously there hasn't been, you haven't gone to overseas to do other war stuff, and battle or whatever. But, like you mentioned, there's currently, Oklahoma National Guard all over,
Absolutely. When you get to a certain rank, and this is fine, they don't really want you to go overseas. Like I said, I'm not quite the spry young man that I was at one point. It's a young man's game. Yeah. And so, we continue to deploy soldiers. In fact, one of the soldiers that was a company commander for me in 2011, Lieutenant Colonel Brent Weiss, is now the battalion commander that's leading the 1,200 men and women over to Africa. So there is this continuing handoff. I have no doubt one day you may be interviewing Brent here, 10 years from now as he continues his career. And that's really great to see.
Yeah. Where I was going with that is that, we've had May 2013, right? We've had the tornadoes through Norman. We've had multiple snowstorms shut the entire state down. You guys also help a lot in that as well, right? You assist in.
We do. So
so there's not just overseas battles.
In fact, we do more of that than anything else. And very much that is, like I said, I work for the governor. And so the governor is responsible for the state of Oklahoma. And so that is obviously a very big part of my portfolio. It doesn't often get, the kind of attention that deploying into combat does, but it's absolutely as critical. And if you're the floods a few years ago that we were rescuing you, that means everything in the world. Yeah. When we show up to, unfortunately, the Moore tornado, I was there with that. There was a National Guard soldier I'm very familiar with that was, he's actually rescuing a mother and a child, and then the child literally gets ripped out of his hands, not to discuss it, but just to show you the kind of heroic activity. He was my machine gunner in my vehicle in Afghanistan, and here he is, trying his best to rescue and save, and he did save. The mother wasn't, unfortunately, not able to save the child, but if you can imagine the horrendousness of that, and he throws himself right in there. That's the kind of soldiers we have, and I could tell stories like that all day long.
Yeah. There's enough stories to fill many movies and many books, right? Like it's no shortage of just heroics from everyday human beings that just happen to be enlisted in the National Guard.
They're at the wrong place at the right time. I like to say, and they rise to the occasion. And we can tell those stories all day.
Yeah. Just coming to current day, where do you see things going? What it doesn't sound like you want to retire anytime soon, unless you want to dive into ChatGPT.
I serve at the pleasure of the governor, and it's an interesting question because I'm very much aware that this is probably what I call my terminal assignment, and that's wonderful.
Yeah.
The opportunities to go on in the National Guard, they're very limited. Basically, every time you go up a rank in the military, 1/3 of the folks, it's a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. It's like working your way up a pyramid. So here we have roughly in the Army, we have 3 1-star generals and we have 1 2-star general. So if you look at that nationwide, there's very few 3 and 4-star generals. And the opportunity to spend the rest of my career here in Oklahoma helping do what I do is all that I could ask for. And I will retire. They will make me, but they'll have to make me because I just love it so much. I think that's very common for people like my father. There will come a day, and I will retire, but hopefully that's a few years in the future.
The other thing is, for someone who's kind of a tech guy, what's it like being involved in the military and some of the tech that you guys get to use that some of the times is, a lot, you're the first guys to use it over general population, right?
Yeah, I think there is an opportunity, especially with cyber. So I was fortunate that my first job I alluded to was with Ernst & Young as a management consultant. I actually did. At the time, we didn't call it cybersecurity. That wasn't a term. It was internet system security. But it was essentially cybersecurity. And right before I transitioned to be a general officer, I became a cyber officer, an Army cyber officer. And I think to answer your question, there's a ton of very interesting and cool technology. I have to kill you if I told you about that. It's out there, and you do get exposed to it in the military. It's a wonderful training environment. It's an opportunity to see the latest and greatest and to use it, right? Because we can all read Wired magazine or watch something on YouTube about a cool piece of technology, but to actually use it and get that hands-on experience is one of the things the military really offers.
Yeah, that would, you're right. Using it is just, you get to just experience it and see what this stuff really does, right? And then, maybe 2 or 3 years later, you see it on the street and you're like, oh, yeah, I get that stuff.
Right, and it works both ways too for the National Guard, because one of the unique aspects of the Guard is we can leverage those unique civilian skills that our members have on active duty. And the active duty figured that out very early. So I'm aware when we were in Baghdad, for instance, we actually had a specialist, which is a lower ranking enlisted member, National Guard member, wasn't from Oklahoma, but from New York, I think, but he was an investment banker. And so he wound up running the Iraqi banking system right after the war because he was an investment banker. So that rank immaterial thing, played out to where he was the expert. And because he was a guardsman, the Army was able to leverage that experience, kind of reverse or reciprocal. So we always have tradesmen, plumbers, et cetera, that are in high demand every time we mobilize because they have the skills that the Army can be lacking in, but that are needed.
Yeah, so, and they've been doing them forever, right? That's their experts. Day job, So,
and a corollary to that is post-Vietnam, to come back to that, we had some incredible helicopter pilots in Oklahoma that had flown in combat in Vietnam that remained in the Oklahoma National Guard. And early on in the war, you may have seen a famous picture of a Chinook, a big 2-bladed helicopter, like at a 90-degree angle landing on that.
Sure.
That was our guys.
Wow.
They were some of the best pilots and remain some of the best pilots in the Army.
Yeah.
Because they had that experience. And that doesn't occur on the active duty, because on the active duty, they tend to rotate 20 years, they leave.
Sure.
These guys were 30-plus year chief warrant officers that had flown combat in Vietnam. They were amazing.
That's amazing.
So that's another unique aspect of the National Guard,
Yeah. Finishing up with some quick fire stuff, just because it's fun to do. What's your favorite food?
Italian. Last name Mancino, so I'm going to go with lasagna.
Okay.
Final answer.
Where do you get great Italian other than family food in Oklahoma City?
I don't eat out a lot.
Okay.
We wind up making it at home, but I would point out that my grandfather, not my grandmother, but my grandfather was an immigrant from Italy and came to Oklahoma from New York. He was a short man. My grandmother was an Irish immigrant. She was very tall, so was very short, very tall man. He made the best lasagna. So
awesome.
Anyone can contact me. We'll give
Family
you a recipe. But it's wonderful.
Brilliant.
Had it for Christmas, so
it must
you're
be
not
good
used
for
to that,
having it.
right? You're not used to lasagna at Christmas.
Yeah.
You're missing out.
Do you have a guilty pleasure that you just, if you ever get time to yourself, that you just, into something?
So the real one that I'm not going to talk about because I'm embarrassed, computer games. Love them.
Like any kind of, are you like on the Xbox, PlayStation, or like a computer
We
PC
can talk
type
about
games?
any of the above.
Really?
But what do you like?
I stopped playing Call of Duty a long time ago when I came to here to play, to play college. Actually, no, after college I stopped because I knew if I invested $500 in a machine, I wouldn't get off it.
There you go.
It was Call of Duty and racing games for me.
So I'm a little on the old side to be that into Call of Duty, and the first person shooters lose a little bit of their,
that's day job.
I like strategy games. Strategy games are a passion of mine, and I enjoy them.
Are you online with headphones chatting to the rest of the
I have
world?
it all. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
The PAOs won't want me to put that out there. Actually, it's great for recruiting today because you know what? That's what kids today do.
Yes.
So that's my tie with the younger generation.
Yeah. Favorite genre of music or favorite artist?
Heavy metal.
Really?
Yeah.
Metallica, old school, like
so the younger kids are going to go. Well,
not
that's
like
not heavy.
Norwegian death metal,
right? No Norwegian death metal, but Metallica, etc.
Okay, that's who I told my wife a couple of months ago.
AC/DC is probably my favorite.
Yeah, I told my wife a couple of months ago, if there's anyone you want to surprise me with tickets, it's Metallica. She's like, really? You never listen to them? I'm like, no, but I want to experience them live.
I went to a Metallica concert late. My PA was like, I might have attended a Metallica concert.
It's your life, sir. Is there a lot of that, like, when you're overseas, there's a lot of heavy metal music playing, or is it a lot of mixed country?
I think it's mixed. I think that people, soldiers and airmen have a wide variety of interests. I can't say this, I'll get in trouble, but country music may or may not be my most preferred genre.
Well, you come from Italian heritage.
Absolutely. Our soldiers love country music, and the country music community here in Oklahoma has always supported us. I think Toby Keith came to Afghanistan to visit, so we couldn't be more happy with our Oklahoma music scene and their support of the National Guard.
Yeah, last one. Just general advice. If you could say something to your, 15-year-old self, what would you tell him?
I would say make sure you join the National Guard, but that's an easy one. I think when you're young like that, you think you know everything. You don't. Listen to others. Evaluate it. You don't have to do what, quote unquote, older people say. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times, older, more experienced people can give you some advice that can really help you out.
Yeah. Awesome.
So I should have listened more.
You should have listened more to older people.
I would have saved myself a lot of trouble.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for taking an hour of your day to tell some stories and to share some light on the Oklahoma National Guard and the great things you guys are doing, continue to do. Hopefully we don't have any natural disasters this tornado season, so you guys will be pretty chilled out and not too busy. But yeah, thank you so much for coming in. For people listening, I'll put links to the website, links to your Instagram, which is really good. By the way, if you don't follow the Oklahoma National Guard on Instagram, you should. Great content down below, and we will catch you in the next episode. Cheers.
Hope you guys enjoyed that great episode. Thank you so much for listening. As always, huge shout out to our sponsors, the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, sharing Oklahoma story through its people since 1927. For more information on the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, go to www.oklahomahof.com and follow them on Instagram for daily updates at OklahomaHOF. Our other sponsor, the Chickasaw Nation, amazing sponsor. They do amazing things for the state, and they're always sponsoring something in Oklahoma. They're a huge supporter of Oklahoma, and without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And our third sponsor is Diffie Ford Lincoln down in El Reno. Now, this one makes me so happy because these guys are great friends of mine, play a lot of golf together. I've bought my cars from them, do most of my oil changes down there, have a cup of coffee, hang out down in El Reno. It's a good spot to go. And not only are they great friends, but they provide a great service. So for over 60 years, third generation family owned Oklahoma business down in El Reno. They're also in Bethany as well. So people in the Bethany area know the Diffies really well. But if you're looking for anything new, used, Ford, Lincoln, or whatever, I'm sure they could find anything you want. Check them out, diffieford.net, and then on Instagram at diffiefordlincoln. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. We are inspired by those around us and hope that you are too. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review so we can keep telling your stories. For more great Oklahoma content, follow This Is Oklahoma on Facebook and Instagram.